All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Fortes, and I am the founder of the Fortes Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Southern California, whose mission is to provide free mentoring to high potential Brazilian students interested in applying to a top U.S. university. So tonight we're going to have a Google Hangout on air event. This is now being broadcast live. It's 9 o'clock Rio de Janeiro time and 5 o'clock California time, where I'm based. And the way we have structured the event going forward is the following. I have here with me a few IME students based in Rio de Janeiro. And some of them have selected a few questions, have submitted a few questions regarding applying to top U.S. universities. And what I would like to then do, and we have a total of 30 minutes, together, is I would like to then call them out, by name, and we'll first go through some of the questions they submitted ahead of time. And I suspect we're going to have some time left, at the end for them then to ask any additional questions they might possibly have. So with that, I would like first, to turn over to Icaro, who has previously submitted a few questions about pursuing a PhD versus a master's degree. So with that, Icaro, if you could please unmute yourself, briefly introduce yourself, and then start asking the questions. We can then start from there.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Icaro. I study electronic engineering at IME, and I'm coming from one semester abroad studying at MIT. And I'm very excited with the idea of pursuing a master's or a PhD abroad in the future. And so my question is about PhD versus master's. So I'd like to ask, is it possible to apply for a PhD degree without holding a master's degree? And how are the chances in this case of you being accepted for the PhD without holding the master's?
Fair enough. So thank you for that, Icaro. So the interesting thing is this is a very common question, and I have actually been asked this a few times before. So I think the very first thing that I would like to highlight is that things are fairly different in the US than they are in Brazil. And it is my understanding that in Brazil, essentially, it is a requirement that you pursue and earn a master's degree before you then move on to pursue a PhD degree. And this is not the case here in the US. More specifically and simplistically, it is perfectly possible and actually quite frequent for people to pursue a PhD degree directly, and that is right after undergrad. Sometimes they stop to study for a few years to work a little bit. Others not, especially those who are interested in pursuing a career in academia. They move straight out of undergrad into PhD. So there is no requirement that you pursue a master's degree or obtain a master's degree before you go for the PhD degree. This is point number one. And also something that was part of your question, I believe, is say what are the chances and whether say it does matter to pursue one versus the other. And I would argue that no, it doesn't. What's more important is that you try to figure out, by yourself, whether you do indeed want to pursue a PhD degree. And let's remember what the difference between the two is. The main and very practical difference, a PhD degree lasts easily 5 years, whereas the master's can be done in 2 years only. So these are fairly different propositions. And I believe you had a second question still on this topic. So if you'd like to move on to the next one, Icaro.
Sure. So my next question is, if I get accepted for the PhD degree, I don't have to get a master's degree first, so I can simply skip it, right? Is that what you said?
So yes, you can skip it. There's no reason for you to obtain the master's first or say during it. You can go straight to PhD and do it in, say, about 5 years. Correct.
All right. So that's pretty much clear. All right.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So thank you for those. And so the next say section, I'm looking at some of the questions we received ahead of time, is instead about MBAs and MBA applications. And there is a question from Thomas. So Thomas, if you would please unmute yourself, briefly introduce yourself, and then ask your question. Okay, I believe Thomas that you are still on mute. So if you could unmute yourself, it's usually there's a tab on your own image. If you could unmute yourself, we would then be able to listen to you.
Could you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Well, I'm Thomas Sauer. I'm a fourth-year student of civil engineering in IME, and I'm really interested to know what can I do previously in terms of studies in order to improve my chances of being selected for a Harvard MBA, for example.
Okay, so this is a fun one, because as I was preparing a little bit for tonight and going over the pre-submitted questions and trying to come up with a few bullet points to answer that, the very first thing that I wrote in response to this question of yours is that this is the million-dollar question, and that's essentially what everybody wants to know, right? So it's a smart of you to ask it, right? So having said that, and jokes aside, there are obviously things that you can do to essentially help with your candidacy. So the way that I would like to structure this is the following. I usually separate the application, and this is not only particular to MBAs, it does apply to masters and PhD applicants as well. But a fairly simple way for you to divvy up the two main portions of your application that are very dependent on you is to, one, call it, the numbers piece, and I'll come back to that in a second, but numbers mean scores in this case, or grades. And the other one has to do with your story, with your personal story. So let me tackle these two in this order. So the first one, which is the numbers piece, as I call it, has everything to do with grades. And grades in this case are your undergrad GPA, and in your case specifically, it also has to do with your GMAT score and most likely your TOEFL score as well. So to answer your question directly, what you can do in terms of studies to get accepted at a top business school, US business school such as Harvard, is, needless to say, to work as hard as you can to earn high scores, undergrad scores, GMAT, and TOEFL. Now, the interesting thing is, as many people say, and this is absolutely true, getting high scores is no guarantee that you will be accepted to a top US MBA. However, does it help? And I would say, and I would absolutely state, yes, it helps. It's much easier and better for you to be an applicant who has high scores. So the short answer regarding your studies is, try to study as hard as you can and to earn high scores, because this is something that will definitely help you stand out from the crowd. Having said that, and that's why I mentioned the other piece of the application as well, which is your story, I would like for you not to limit yourself to the scores piece, because when you talk about studies, it might be, hey, you know, I will fully focus on studying only during undergrad, trying to get, you know, as high scores as I can, because hey, that's the best thing that I can to get accepted. That's not sufficient. I would claim that it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, and hence why I brought up the piece of the of your story as part of the application. And when I say story, I'm talking about extracurricular activities, and I'll just pick on one, and that being leadership activities. And so, if in addition to studying and getting high scores, you can also get involved with activities during your undergrad where you can, for instance, demonstrate leadership, this is also something that comes the time for you to apply, especially in the form of the essays for business school, is something that in addition to hopefully high and good scores, you can also talk about things that you do related to leadership that in essence help you distinguish yourself and stand out from the others. So absolutely study hard. I think this goes without saying, but don't do that only. Also focus on other things that can help you stand out from the other applicants with whom essentially you are competing. And you know, this is a very competitive process, especially for top business schools such as HBS or Harvard Business School. Okay. So let me see here.
Awesome.
So let me see here. This was related to MBA application, and this question was from Thomas. And we have Icaro. There were a few other questions that I got from about the Fortes Foundation. So let me do the following. I'm looking here at the list, and I realize there's another question from Icaro regarding scholarships and student loans. So let's do this. Here's what I would like to propose that we do. Let's go to Icaro's question about scholarships and student loans, and then we can move to any additional questions you guys might have, and then more towards the end, I can talk a little bit about the Fortes Foundation, because some of there were a few questions, actually 3 questions from IME students who just couldn't be with us on screen, and these have to do with the foundation and say where the foundation can help you the most. So these are questions that I think may be helpful to a broader audience as well. So I can leave some of the minutes towards the end to cover those in more general terms. So with that, Icaro, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question about scholarship and student loan?
Yes. So my other question is, how hard is it to get funding in case of master's or PhD? In each case, how difficult is it to get this funding? And that's basically it. How hard is it to get funding in the case of master's, in the case of PhD?
Yeah, fair enough. So let me first address the second part of your question. I am not aware of any data that talks about the specific differences between availability of scholarship and funding between masters and PhDs. I'm not aware of data, but I am aware of anecdotal information. And what I have heard and learned is that it's usually easier to get scholarships for PhD programs. And I take it that this is, first of all, there are fewer spots for PhD students and usually fewer applicants as well. Not everybody is willing to dedicate 5 years of their life to very intense and specific and deep study. And at the same time, the PhD students usually are interested in pursuing a career in academia and becoming professors, and professors with PhD degrees are not that easy to find. So my understanding, as I said, even if anecdotally, is that it's usually not an issue to get funding for PhD programs in general. So it would be easier versus a master's degree. Having said that, this is also similarly to your initial question about master's versus PhD programs. At the core of your question is the point about scholarships and funding. And this is also a fairly interesting one that I'd like to talk a little bit about because of the following. I see it's almost like a dilemma in the following sense. On the one hand, and this is very common for Brazilian students because top Brazilian universities oftentimes are free, whereas top US universities are nothing, say even close to being free. They are fairly expensive. Even the public universities, that's a common confusion because public university in Brazil is usually free, and in the US it isn't. Examples being UC Berkeley and UCLA, both here in California, not very far from where I live. And yet, the fact that they are public doesn't mean that they're free. They are paid oftentimes just a little bit cheaper than the private institutions. But what I'm trying to say is Brazilian students are oftentimes very concerned and worried about paying for their studies at a top U.S. university. And I think this is fairly understandable and justified because if you don't have the money or if you don't find the means to pay for your studies, you won't be able to study. So I want to acknowledge that, and I respect that. On the other side of the spectrum, this is why I somewhat call this a dilemma, is the fact that there are, yes, options for you to fund your studies at a top U.S. university through a combination of multiple things. And one of them can be in the form of a scholarship, which the university may grant you, a partial or even a full scholarship. Even these are harder to get. That's one. So it's essentially, in practical terms, a discount. Costs you specifically less to study at that university. And the more interested they are in you, the higher the chances they will offer a partial or even a full ride, type of scholarship. And also through some forms of financial aid or student loans, where essentially you're being lent money at usually lower interest rates, and in a combination of scholarship and student loans, and in certain instances you may be able to also get a part-time job during your studies as a research assistant type of thing. You put all of that together, and oftentimes you will be able to find the means and the funds to study. So what I meant about the dilemma is that on the one hand, you are absolutely right to worry and to be focused on this, and on the other hand, especially for great high potential applicants that the universities are interested in having in bringing on board, once you are accepted, the university is also interested in making sure that you find the means to study there. And as far as say ways of finding out more about scholarships and funding, oftentimes the university does either have some kind of partnership with a bank that they can facilitate, or they may also point you to other foundations, oftentimes private foundations, who are interested. There's an application process that is competitive, no guarantee of getting it, and there are also foundations in Brazil who also provide some kind of assistance. And in the case of Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, it's usually after you do get accepted. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, and actually, with that, I would like, we have about 10 minutes left. I'll just leave the last, say 2 to 3 minutes to cover a little bit about the Fortes Foundation, including some of the questions that I received previously. But before we do that, the good news is we have a few minutes still available for any of you to ask any other questions you might have regarding applying to a top U.S. university. And if any of you would like to do that, I would say just raise your hand unmute yourself and ask the question. So Giovanna is doing just that. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, let's hear you, Giovanna.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey guys, my name is Giovanna. I'm a fifth-year student. I'm an electronical engineering student. And Chris, I'd like to ask you a question about timing. And I'm sure a lot of people have this same question because I'm not sure what's the best timing to apply for an MBA or even a master's or a PhD abroad, because I know some universities would actually require you to have some time at the working before you can apply for an MBA. So do you recommend anything regarding timing to apply? Is there any best practice?
Yes. So the answer is absolutely yes. And actually, so I'm going to give you, say, first the typical and the standard answer, and let's use consultants and also investment bankers as an example, because most of them absolutely follow this rule of thumb that I'm going to describe. Short answer is 3 years worth of work experience. So this is what you will see many people who go into consulting and investment banking right after undergrad do exactly. They spend 3 years, not more, not less, working at consulting or, say, investment banking. And obviously this can apply to other people working in industry, nonprofit, and whatnot. It's usually kind of a magical number. And say right when they are into their second year of the full-time work, they apply to the university, top U.S. university, top MBA type of school, so a business school, and then provided they get accepted, they finish working for 3 years, and then enroll into an MBA program. So this is a typical and traditional amount of money, and like any other rule or rule of thumb, there are exceptions to that. There are some people who only have 2 years worth of experience. Some people, these are really exceptions, but they do exist, go straight from undergrad into business school. And say Thomas was talking about Harvard. Harvard is one of the business schools that actually does welcome that for people who have no work experience. And then if you go to the other side of the spectrum, you do have people with way more years of work experience, 5, 7, 8, that do for different reasons become only then interested in pursuing a business school. But to stick with a number, because I think there is actually a traditional answer to your question, having 3 years of full-time work experience before you start your say MBA days is a fairly commonly practiced work experience tenure. Okay. All right. So let's see. Okay, Thomas, I see you. Raising your hand. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, Chris. Besides status and knowledge, what can I earn from after an MBA?
So I heard the second part of your question. So knowledge was the second piece. What did you say first before knowledge?
Status.
Yes. This is also an interesting question because I would say many things. A network of usually very qualified, driven, and ambitious people, because especially if you are at a great institution, your classmates will be accomplished people who have very bold ambitions for work and for life and for society. So you will get exposed to classmates who oftentimes become friends and friends for life, who have the opportunity of changing your life in multiple ways. And the network is not only, in my assessment, the more obvious part of it, as in networking later on with people that can become partners of you, that can employ you or refer you to a company, but also some people with whom you can start a business anew. And so this is, I'm being pragmatic and practical. And now, if I may also be subjective, I think it has the opportunity, especially in your case, you're talking about an MBA, so a 2-year full-time MBA, where you would get the chance of essentially no longer studying and no longer working. Pardon me, no longer working and dedicating yourself full-time to a very intense and self-immersed experience. And I would claim that you can earn a lot of self-knowledge as well, as far as understanding who you are, what your values are, what is it that is important to you, that an MBA can grant you. So it's obviously much harder to quantify this kind of benefit, but it has the chance of changing your life and change your life for the better. Granted, you're going to have to study a lot, and oftentimes you will have spent a lot of money, not only in tuition, but also in foregone salary, because for essentially 2 years you're no longer earning salary. So the financial implications are quite dramatic. But do I think it's worth it? Worth the effort and worth the pursuit? Absolutely yes. Okay, wonderful. So I can see Ícaro. So Ícaro, if you want to unmute yourself, let's see what question you have.
Yes, I'd like to know a little bit more about Foundation, like what you guys do and how the Foundation mentoring can help me into the process of an application.
Yeah. Okay, that's actually awesome. Thank you for asking that question, because this is a way for me to address some of the questions very much related to this that were submitted by other IME students. So in succinct terms, the Fortes Foundation provides free mentoring to high potential students interested in applying to a top US university, and irrespective of field and irrespective of level, meaning could be for undergrad, master's, MBA, PhD, could be in business, could be in engineering, in biology, chemistry, of all sorts. And to be accepted by the Fortes Foundation, there is equally an application process that is competitive, and not only because this is a very serious time commitment from both sides, but also because it is provided for free. There's no cost associated with the mentoring itself. And for more specific information on how to apply and how the application process works, you please just go to fortesfoundation.org, and you can find more information there on the application process itself, whose deadline, by the way, for 2015 is approaching and is on November 15th of this year, 2014. So this is a little bit at a higher level. Now, more specifically, and you can also find what I'm going to just tell you on the website itself, there are essentially 5 steps that are part of the application process that the Fortes Foundation can help its mentored students with. 5. So the first one is essentially helping you select the best fit top US universities for what you're looking for. Fortunately, there are many top US universities, and yet, depending on what you're looking for, those best fit universities will differ. They can be on the East Coast, New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, what have you, North Carolina. They can be on the West Coast, usually in California. They can be in the Midwest, which is Chicago, and very other different areas as well. And usually Brazilian students, even those who are fairly familiar with this, cannot essentially differ, which one top U.S. university from the other. And this is something that we can already help with, especially if you say, hey, I'm interested in a PhD in, say, artificial intelligence, and obvious names in this case would be MIT and Stanford, just to name one example. Whereas if you're interested in PhD in, say, biotechnology, it might be Harvard and UC Berkeley, just to name a few examples. That's point 1. The point 2 is, after the best fit top U.S. universities are identified, is to essentially help you find out and understand what the many application requirements are. And those also differ somewhat from university to university and definitely from program to program. If you are like Thomas, interested in an MBA, it's going to be GMAT, there'll be letters of recommendation and whatnot. If you're interested in a PhD, which seems to be more of your case, Icaro, then it's not the GMAT, it's often the GRE. Sometimes the TOEFL is required, in others it's not. And there's the expectation that it's, it will be way more about, say, your academic and your research inclination. Granted, it's a PhD or master's as opposed to an MBA. So point 2 is to help you understand the application requirements. The third one is to then find out where are you versus what's expected out of that application requirement. And actually, I can connect that back to one of the things Thomas said, which is, hey, what can I do to better prepare myself to be accepted? So he's essentially trying to assess himself and in anticipation of what's required, see where he can strengthen himself. So this third point is, let's understand you versus what those best fit top US universities are looking for. And in certain cases, you will already have most of it, and in this case, good for you. In others, you won't. And let me just throw an example such as volunteering experience. It might be the case that it's a top US university that cares a lot about that, and you may not have much or any of that. So then we're going to have to work together and discuss how best to address that and see what you can do to fill this gap. Then the fourth one is to build an action plan to bridge these gaps and essentially put together your entire package for application. And there are, granted, many things to be done, and not surprisingly, this is a process that can easily last an entire year, hence why we cover the mentoring from January through December of any given year for application to the university by, say, December 31st. And then, as we go throughout the year and execute against this plan, course corrections are necessary, and especially depending on kind of scores you're getting, be it your undergrad GPA or GMAT, GRE. If you got a great score, great, no reason to worry so much about it. If throughout the year you don't manage to get a great score, then we're going to have to make up for that in some way through the other parts of the application. So the idea is to help throughout the application process with the ultimate goal of hopefully getting you accepted at the top US university of your dreams. Okay. All right. So let's do this. We are now. I'm just watching the clock. We are now past our time. At this point. I would say, and I've, thanks to Icaro, I've just had a chance to essentially, cover a little bit, about the Fortis Foundation. So hopefully that was helpful and sufficient to other people who may be watching us in a live or later on the recording on YouTube or on fortisfoundation.org. I would say we have time for one more question in case any of you have it. If you don't, it's perfectly fine. I can wrap it up and just thank everybody. So does any of you, Giovanna, Icaro, or even Thomas, have any other, say, closing question before we wrap things up? Okay. So with that, I essentially wanted to thank the three of you again, Giovanna, Icaro, and also Thomas, for not only submitting your questions ahead of time, but also for taking the time to be having this virtual conversation. All three of you are in Rio. I am in California, so it's great. The technology allows for all of that. I also wanted to thank other IME students who expressed an interest and submitted additional questions to us, but they just couldn't be with us tonight. One of them actually was in Japan, so that was absolutely a good reason not to be able to do this. It's a very, very different time zone. So once again, thank you all for all of this, and for anybody who is interested in being considered for free mentoring by the Fortis Foundation in 2015. The application deadline is November 15th, 2014, and you can find out more instructions on our website at fortisfoundation.org. With that, wish you all a good night and good luck as well.
All right, thank you, Chris.